You're listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. This is Season 1, Episode 5, Ellie. I'm your host, Haley Radke. Today we're going to be talking to Ellie, a fellow adoptee who'll be sharing what it's like to be adopted by extended family members. We discuss what her relationship is like with her birth mother currently, and her longing for something more. We wrap up with some recommended resources for you. I'm pleased to introduce you to our guest, Ellie. Ellie is an in-family adoptee. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'd love it if you'd start just by sharing your story with us.
Okay, so it's a little complicated. I'll try and give the basics.
Okay.
So my biological parents, birth mom and birth dad, they met when they were early 20s. He was in the Air Force, and they met. They got married. There's some speculation as to whether or not they were already pregnant with me when they got married. I don't know for sure if that's true, but at some point during her pregnancy, he cheated on her, and they got a divorce. And sort of along the lines, my birth mother, she was 23, didn't know what to do. Obviously, her husband turned out to be a jerk. So my adoptive parents, and this is where the whole family part gets complicated. Through adoption, my birth mother is my cousin. I was adopted by my birth mother's aunt and uncle. So biologically, my great aunt and uncle. And that's really hard to follow, I know. So through adoption, she's now my cousin. So her aunt and uncle had offered to take me for a time to let her get back on her feet, figure life out. And at some point, about a month before I was born, and again, there's kind of conflicting reports here, she decided that she was going to give me up for adoption for good. And the reasoning, there's sort of been two reasonings. One was that she wanted me to have a mom and a dad and siblings. I have 3 older sisters that are my adoptive parents' biological children, so I'm the only adopted child in my family. So she wanted me to have 2 parents and a family, and she, I think, really also wanted to go back to school and have a life and have a career. And to her credit, she's a very, very successful woman. So, that worked out. So when I was born in March 1989, so I'm 27 now, I was born, and my adoptive mother flew out to California, where I was born, and was there. It was about a month after I was born. They finalized the adoption. I was given a different name when I was born, but my adoptive parents changed it, which is good because I didn't like my first name. And that was sort of that. And my mom flew home with me, and my dad and sisters met me at the airport and had this whole little family reunion type thing. And some stranger who probably just had no idea why this woman is walking off the plane holding a pretty newborn baby, and this whole family is so excited. He probably had no idea what was going on, but he offered to take their picture. So I have a picture of that, which is neat. I don't know. It's never been really a reunion. It's just always been there. They had pictures, and how I was doing updates sent for the first couple of years. I think I think they came to visit once or twice, or we would see them when we went out to visit family out there. But I guess I believe I talked about this on one of my vlogs. The part, I guess, for me that was sort of the reunion was when I was 11, my grandfather passed away. My grandfather on my mom's side. And so we had to go out there for his funeral, and it was sudden. And so maybe the night or two before we left for the funeral, my parents sat me down at dinner and proceeded to explain to me that this blonde lady that I had always known as my cousin was in fact my birth mother. And to this point, I'd known I was adopted. They told me that from the start. Before I even knew what the word meant, I knew that I was adopted. I knew whatever that meant. I knew what it was. I knew I was that. And they'd always said it was in family, but that it never really registered what that meant or who it might be. And people have asked me what did you wonder? Did you have any idea? And I really didn't. It wasn't something I'd thought about. I was 11. It just hadn't crossed my mind. So that was a bit of a jolt, to say the least. And then to have to go out and see her and face her. And honestly, I think it's one of the most dramatic things. And it's not like anything significant happened. I just had no idea how to handle it. So that was sort of my reunion, I guess.
I'm sorry, I'm just kind of in shock. the most common story for adoptees, mostly that I've heard so far, is that their biological parents were teenagers, but yours were married. I mean, my goodness, what a complicated situation.
And that's the part that I've struggled with a lot. My birth father is not in the picture. They divorced. I think he stayed in contact for the first year I was born, and since then, nothing. At some point, he found my birth mother on Facebook, and I then saw his profile and proceeded to block him immediately because wasn't ready for that. Didn't like what I saw. I just didn't really want to deal with that. But I guess what bothers me is that, she was 23. She was a stable person. She had her parents there for support, and it's always struck me as a little bit of a selfish decision. It's both selfless and selfish, in my opinion. Like, she had good intentions in wanting me to have two parents and a family, and I am always grateful for that. But at the same time, like, she got to go out and live her life and be very successful. And it's one of those things you just kind of question.
I'm sure. So what's your relationship with her like now?
It's weird. I mean, really, the only time I see her is at weddings or funerals. I'm in the process of planning my wedding, and so I'm a little wary of what her role is going to be in that. We talk every now and then. We're friends on social media. I hide her from my feed because I just don't need that reminder popping up all the time. She's actually also getting married this summer, which is a really weird juxtaposition for me to be planning a wedding at the same time as my birth mother. And the man she's marrying has a family, and that's a little weird for me too. Like, logically, I'm happy for her. I'm happy she finally found someone because she never, she hasn't married since, my birth father. But at the same time, it's hard for me to be like, oh, well, look, you're getting this whole new family. Like, great.
So she didn't have any other children then?
No, which I've always said I was grateful for because I don't know how I would handle that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the youngest child, but biologically I'm an only child. So I feel like I often display characteristics of both.
Mm-hmm.
I have always felt different from my sisters because they're all the same. They're all, biologically sisters, and I've always been the odd one out.
And what's your age difference?
The oldest and I are 12 years apart. The next one up for me is 3 years. Then the next one up to that is 9 years older than me, and then 12 years older. So there's a pretty significant gap. And obviously the oldest was very, very much old enough to know what was going on when I was adopted. So she probably has the best understanding of it, how it was at that point.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's something that's probably been one of the hardest things for me to come to terms with, is being okay to be myself. I always tried so hard to fit in with them and do the things that I knew they would approve of, And eventually, sometime in college, I gave up and I was like, nope, this is me. I'm different. That's fine. And it still bothers me a little bit, but not as much as it used to.
Your sisters, have they married or had children?
Yep, all three are married. Two of them have kids.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always that whole, like, at what point do they tell their kids, And my birth mother has two brothers, and they have kids who are in their teens now. And it's like, well, do they know who I am? And I always go into situations with family wondering if people know, that I'm biologically her daughter. I should add, I wrote about this in my blog too. When I went to my grandfather's funeral, so I just found out who she was. My birth mother's mother tested me. She looked at some pictures of my birth mother's brothers and referred to them as my uncles, which they were biologically, but through adoption, which I'd only known them through up till now, they were my cousins. So she referred to them to see if I would react, to see if I would be like, oh, they're not my uncles, they're my cousins, And I didn't react because I knew that's what she was doing. But to this day, it just bothers me so much that I was 11. I had just found out. She didn't know that I had found out, and she was testing me to see how much I knew about my own adoption.
I don't even know what to say about that. Who does that? Who does that? That's bizarre.
I don't know. I think it's a situation that no one really knew how to handle. Yeah. I think it was handled poorly by some.
Well, it sounds like you all still don't really know.
Not really.
You still don't really know how to handle it.
No, not really. And I'm sure that's one of the questions that you'll get to later is, what would I say? What would I change about the situation?
Well, I'd love to hear that.
I guess the hardest part for me has been sort of the lack of open communication about it. It's always been sort of this hush-hush topic. I mean, it's come up. My family and I talk about it, I wouldn't say a fair amount, but, sometimes, especially when, family events come up that she's going to be at. I think they always, ask how I'm doing, ask how I'm handling it. And it seems well-meaning, and on some level, I think it is. But on another level, I think they just want to hear that I'm fine and I don't care about her and, and that I'm, part of their family and she doesn't matter to me. And so it's always sort of been like the narrative that I've gotten, that I should stick to, is that I shouldn't get too close to her. I shouldn't, talk with her that much. And so I've kind of been in this limbo of how close do I get to her, not only for my own sake, but for fear of hurting my family and for them thinking that I am replacing them with her or something like that. I think my mom told me that she was always afraid that when I turned 18, I was going to run off and go be with her. Like, that's not a lot of confidence in your parenting.
Hmm.
that bothered me. It's like she wasn't a bad parent, They raised me in a way that they tried to make it seem like I was exactly like their other three daughters. And like logically, again, I understand that. I wrote a whole blog about logic versus emotion because I like to, sort everything out. Like logically, I completely understand why she tried to treat me exactly like my sisters. It makes sense to me. But at the same time, and again, that was 27 years ago. Like adoption wasn't talked about that much. There wasn't a lot of literature on it. You just sort of handled it how you thought was best. And I truly do think they thought that they were doing the best they could. But looking back, I think I needed to be treated a little bit differently for them to at least acknowledge that I wasn't the same as my sisters, that, I was, I don't even know what exactly. I felt like I was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And I tried so hard for so long to get that to fit. And it never did. And it's never going to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of adoptees probably feel that way, trying to fit in and knowing they can't, but not really why.
It sounds like it's even more complex in your situation because in a closed adoption, of course, you're obviously different. You're completely different genetically. Right. And so I'm assuming that there's some misconceptions about that. And I really don't know that much about in-family adoption. What would you tell me about that? What are some misconceptions?
I think adoptees who come from closed adoption think that it's sort of the best way to have an adoption. And I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying there's still things that add another layer of complexity to it. I have so much sympathy for people that are trying to find their parents and connect with them, and they have no idea where they come from. Like, I can't imagine that because I do know where I come from. But at the same time, like, I've had to grow up knowing she's there, but just kind of dangling. Like, I know she's there, but I can't really have this relationship with her because then I'd be betraying my family. So we all kind of tiptoe around this whole thing. And it's just, it's really complicated. I never know the right thing to say or do. I mean, she offered to pay for my wedding dress. It's like, that's what my mom does, And I was so taken aback by that, and I didn't know how to handle it. I don't know how to handle when I have kids at some point. Is she going to be around? Like, is that normal for a cousin / birth mother? It's confusing, I think is the main word I would use to describe it.
It sounds very confusing. Yeah, I will admit that I have been one of those adoptees who's said, "But this closed system is so ridiculous. What about in family?" And
I mean, it is. You can't. I don't think you can argue only for one or only for the other. I think that's the way that adoption in general is trending, is to be more open. Mm-hmm. And in general, I think that's good. In general, I wish people never had to be given up for adoption. So.
Yes, family preservation. That's where it's at.
Yes.
Have you actually ever had a conversation with your birth mother just about What should our relationship be, or have you ever told her anything like that?
Not really. From what I can grasp, she's very closed off about this. She dealt with it 27 years ago and has spent a lot of time trying to compartmentalize it, trying to put it in this far corner and not deal with it, except when it's convenient for her. So, at certain times she'll reach out. She tries to, for lack of better term, she tries to buy me. She'll send me presents. She'll send me, gift cards. And I guess the hard part for me is that these just indicate that she doesn't really know who I am. We've never had a real conversation where she's really sat down and gotten to know me beyond what I share on social media, beyond what my family could tell her. I tried to have a conversation when I was about 22, and I had all these questions ready, and first off, she put it off for probably 4 or 5 months before it ever actually happened. And when it did happen, she just sort of danced around the questions and just gave really vague answers. And it was really frustrating. And so I've never tried since then. It just didn't seem worth it.
When I was in reunion with my birth mom, I had asked her a couple of times, would you ever go to counseling with me? And it was because I knew she had blocked out a lot of things and hadn't dealt with it, and was hoping that, if she went, she could deal with some of her issues. But at the time, I really didn't realize how many issues I had stemming from it as well. So I can hear that she's definitely not dealt with those things.
Yeah, and I guess to me it sort of is what it is at this point. I'm not going to push it. I'm dealing, in my opinion at least, I'm dealing very well with my emotions. I go to therapy every couple of weeks, and it's hard. Like, it's really hard. You talk about some really intense feelings, and you go to places that hurt, and it's raw, but I think that I'm so much better for it because I know exactly where I stand with myself, at least, and I know how to cope with emotions as they come up and deal with things. And I like to be open and transparent, and that's just me.
Was there a point when you realized that you were coming out of the fog, so to speak, the adoptee lingo?
Probably when I first came across Flip the Script. That would be, was that 2014? I think it was 2014. And I guess, sort of naively, I had always considered myself to be in this bubble. Adoption isn't something people talk about. It's just not. Like, people knew, people that are close to me, I'd mention it in passing. But in general, it's just not something society talks about. So then to come across this whole Twitter feed of all these people saying all of these things, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, you're just like me. You feel the same things. And I was like, it sort of just really justified it for me. Like, what I'm feeling is real. Other people feel it. And it just made me feel so much better in a weird way, that other people knew how I felt. And especially when I connected with 2 other open adoption adoptees, my eyes were even more opened at that point. And along with that, when I started reading The Primal Wound, I started reading some blogs, and really just diving in to just intake as much information as I could and see what was out there. And that's when I sort of decided to stop covering it up and stop masking my feelings and, stop pretending that it didn't bother me. Because it did. It does, and it's always going to, and that's just how it is.
How long have you been in therapy?
Almost 2 years. So around the same time that I started getting into all of the adoption stuff was the same time that I moved across the country to start a new job and to be closer to the man who's now my fiance. And so as I'm going through all of this, I'm moving to a new city where I don't know a lot of people yet. He's my only support there. And I realized at that point that our relationship wouldn't survive if I didn't go see somebody. I couldn't put it all on him. I couldn't expect him to carry this burden and help me with it. So that's what really kind of pushed me into it. And it's one of the best decisions I've ever made, I think.
Does your therapist have experience with adoption and adoptee issues?
Not really. She has experience with family in general. She was the one, well, there was one in particular at the place I was going to that did have adoption experience, but she didn't have any openings. So I got recommended to this lady, and it was great. I don't really know how to explain it. We just talk a lot about accepting feelings, not judging myself for feeling certain ways, and trying to not, write all these stories in my head about what other people are feeling because it's probably not true. And I tend to catastrophize things, especially with family. So,
Well, thanks for sharing that. I've been counseling for quite a long time, so I've definitely had many benefits from dealing with my stuff.
I definitely would recommend it for anybody, not even people going through adoption, just in general. I think everybody could stand to talk to someone every now.
Absolutely. Well, my BA was in psychology, so
Oh,
I've
nice.
always been a big believer in counseling. So that's why I'm always curious about that. Ellie, how has faith or spirituality hindered or helped impacted your adoptee journey?
My biological mother is what she calls Catholic light, meaning she doesn't really practice, but at some level, she considers herself Catholic. My adoptive parents are Southern Baptist, and that's how I was raised. I was raised in a pretty strict church. There were strict rules about dating and sex before marriage and, alcohol, and it was a very close-minded way of thinking looking back now. And when I got out of high school and into college, I stopped going to church. And I really haven't been back since. Through the years, I've come to be a little bit more spiritual. I still really don't like organized religion, mainly because of the experiences I had in the church growing up. I wasn't treated the best when I started to question things. So honestly, it hasn't played a large role. I mean, growing up, I really do think that the morals I have were instilled in me because of that religious upbringing, and so I wouldn't ever change that. And I don't at all like fault my parents. I just don't really believe in the same things anymore. Or not, I guess it's not even the same things, it's not to the same level that they do.
Mm-hmm.
I've always tried to make it on my own and do everything on my own and be this really strong person. And most of the time I can do that. And there's sometimes every now and then that it's just like I can't do it. So that's when I go to my happy place, which is nature. That's where I feel closest to God. That's where I can be spiritual. So it's I don't really know how you'd describe it. It's there, but it's not a huge influencing factor, I guess.
Do you think your adoptive parents' faith was a factor in them choosing to adopt you?
Probably. I think it probably was, because I know for a fact at the time they couldn't afford to adopt me. They had 3 other kids. My dad was, working, but still wasn't making a lot to support a family. And I have heard stories from my older sisters that there was one year that they shouldn't have like made it through. They didn't have enough money to like get through everything, and somehow they just did. And so I think that's, them kind of believing in some kind of divine intervention. I don't know. But I do think that it played some role. I know they prayed about it a lot. I know they talked with people at church about it.
You had mentioned earlier that you blocked your birth father as soon as you saw his name come up on Facebook.
Yeah.
Why do you think you have such... I feel like he's the inciting factor as to why you were relinquished. And so that can't feel very good.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of it. And the fact, and until I found him or he found me and I blocked him, up until that point, I had so much anger. It's like, why did you never try to find me? Why did you never try to contact me? Like, I'm here, I'm out here. You could easily find me through my birth mother. That wouldn't be hard. And so I had so much anger. And I still do to an extent. Like, it bothers me that he's never even tried, And I don't know for sure if he ever saw my Facebook, if he ever saw at least what I look like now. But I, at that point, decided to block him given what I saw. There was a lot of really interesting political stuff that I did not agree with whatsoever. And I really just didn't want to be associated with someone like that at that point. And I don't know that I ever will be. I don't know that I'll ever get past that lingering little bit of anger and the fact that he's still 27 years later. Not once. And yeah, I mean, to an extent, part of it's on me, but like part of it's on him too.
Does he have other children that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of, but again, all I've seen is his Facebook page, so I really don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know.
Birth moms have a lot of shame, and that's often why they aren't good in relationship. There's a lot of secondary rejection, blah, 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 blah. But I think the fathers do too. And so maybe that's one of the reasons. Now, I'm not telling you all this, so I think you should reach out. I'm just saying, like, I hear you.
I don't know. Maybe at some point I will, but for right now, I don't really have any desire.
Also, how much capacity do we have to work on all these different relationships at once? You've got this wedding coming up, so you're going to have a new look to your relationship with your fiance, being married, and because your relationship with your birth mom doesn't sound settled or like you might like it to look like, there's only so many things someone can handle at once.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I understand that.
Yeah, I really just don't want another thing on my plate at the moment.
Sorry for bringing it up.
No, I mean, that's fine. It's not. I really don't. I'm very apathetic about it. I really just don't have a lot of emotions about him at this moment, and I'm okay with that. Like, I'm great not feeling a lot about him.
Yeah, I have to, with my mom, I have to think about that way sometimes. Like, she still doesn't want to contact me. Like, I'm not thinking about that. Yeah.
It'd be so hard. I can't imagine like meeting her and having conversations and suddenly having it just completely cut off.
Yeah. It was right before Christmas, and we were going to meet up before Christmas, and I had to cancel. I was still in university at the time, and I had a bunch of exams and stuff. It just kind of was bad timing. And so we were going to reschedule for after Christmas, and she emailed me and said something like, the way that you've described some of my family and you've interpreted things, and she's like, let's put it off for a while or something, or let's give it a while.
So she tried to put it on you?
Yeah. And then that was it. I haven't heard back from her since. And I've reached out multiple times, and she lives in my city. So.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
So sometimes I wonder, am I going to bump into her sometime?
Whether intentionally or not, I've put a great deal of distance between myself and my family. We're on opposite coasts now. My biological family in particular, my birth mother, my family. The rest of my family's all spread out, but I sort of like it that way. I feel like I'm just sort of removed from all of it, and I have my life here. And
you're building a new life.
Yeah, I'm building, at some point, my own family, if I ever decide that I can handle that.
Yeah, that's a whole nother layer to feelings to work through.
So I've heard.
Yeah. So is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to share with our listeners?
I think what makes my situation fairly unique is that I am the only adopted child. I feel like in a lot of situations they'll adopt multiple kids or just one. And I don't know how common it is to have, 3 siblings and then one that's adopted. And that has always been a little hard for me to always feel like the odd one out. But then to feel like, well, they are family, so shouldn't I still feel a little bit like them, And I'm not. Like, I am not at all like any of my sisters. I think one of your questions that you had was, what's the dream? What would be the ideal adoption situation? And I think, like you, I'm very much in favor of family preservation. I think she could have kept me. Her mom was very supportive. She would have been a single mom, yeah, but, you wouldn't have broken that connection. You wouldn't have caused that trauma for both people. I think if I were to have a completely magic wand, I would just be the biological daughter of my family. Because they are good people. For as much as they maybe just were a bit ignorant about how to handle it, they're good people, and they meant well, and, they are my family at the end of the day, and I know that they, have my back and they care. I guess that would be the ideal situation. One of the two. Either she kept me or I was biologically already their daughter.
And what about your relationship with her right now? What would you like it to look like?
And this is something I've talked with my therapist a lot about. Like, I have this deeply rooted need to understand things. And it probably stems from being adopted and not having an understanding of that situation. I really just want to understand, like, what happened 27 years ago, how she got to that point, how she could hold me and look at me and keep me for a month and then give me away. Why she can't have an in-depth and meaningful relationship with me now, like why she is so satisfied to keep it shallow and on the surface, because that's not me. And it's really hard for me to just pretend like la-di-da, everything's fine, it's hard. So that I guess I wish that we would have a really real conversation where we actually share our true emotions about things. But I know on some level it's never going to happen.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. You're really sharing your heart, and I appreciate that. It's not easy.
No, but it feels good.
I'm glad. I asked you to bring some recommended resources for our listeners, and I have 2 to share. If that's okay, I'll go first. When you were talking, you mentioned the Flip the Script hashtag, and so I think it would be awesome for our listeners to go back on Twitter and read through some of those tweets. They're usually in November because it's National Adoption Month. And so adult adoptees have been asked to share their feelings about adoption using that hashtag Flip the Script. And so I think you said it was started in 2014. So you can look back through 2014 tweets, 2015 tweets. And this year, I'm sure they're going to have it again in November. It really does share the adoptee out of the fog picture of adoption.
Yes, absolutely.
I had fun tweeting through that too in November.
Yes, yeah, it was great to connect with so many people.
So the real resource I really want to recommend that I prepared before was the Sister Wish blog. And it's written by Kat Stanley, and Kat with a K, and her Twitter handle is Kat S Writes. And she is an open adoption adoptee. And she's got links on her blog to other adoptee blogs, other open adoption blogs. And she's very vulnerable with her feelings in her blog as well as on Twitter. She's got this really amazing word cloud on the top of her blog.
Yeah.
And I just want to read, I want to read one phrase from it that really hit me hard when I read it, because it just reminded me how much I don't know about open adoption. I dealt with every single reunion issue adult adoptees have, except I was 6.
Yeah.
Pretty powerful.
Yeah, to add to that, Kat found me and one other open adoptee in 2014, and we were the first open adoption adoptees she'd ever come across. So the 3 of us kind of have I don't know if click's the right word, but we kind of have a support system in each other, that we all have this situation in common. So I've video chatted with Kat and this other lady, a handful of times, and she's great. She really has a way with words and is very mature and thoughtful about things. So I feel like that's what happens when you find out something like this at such a young age. I feel like you're forced to grow up and deal with this really, really heavy thing. And so you just become a really strong person, I think.
Yes, I can definitely see a lot of strength in you. Being in my 30s and seeing that you're 27, you have a lot of wisdom for your age.
Thank you.
Just even having the knowledge that, I think I need to go and talk to someone. There's a lot of people that wouldn't even have the strength to do that.
Well, thank you.
So you have a book to share with us.
I do. This was a book that at some point when I was delving into adoption stuff, I came across. And it's called The Primal Wound by Nancy Newton Verrier. And it was, I think, the first thing I read that really hit home. I would just be reading and I was going through and highlighting things that stood out to me, and whole pages were highlighted. So all these sections, there was one, I'll share this because it just popped into my head. There was one passage in particular, about how she kind of compared adoption to plates being broken, and how this plate breaks and you try and put all these pieces back together and fit them just right. They never quite do. There's glue and it works, but it's not the same, and it's never going to be the same. And that really kind of stuck with me for whatever reason. But she is just so insightful, and she's interviewed, numerous adoptees and has their stories and their thoughts, and I just connected with so much in that book. So especially if you're like just starting out, learning about your adoption experience and getting involved, I would recommend it.
I've also read her second book. Have you seen that, Coming Home to Self?
Oh boy, no, I haven't.
When you're ready for the next level, it's just one more added layer on top.
Oh boy.
There's a chapter in there strictly on reunion. And when I was into the reunion roller coaster, let's say, when I reunited with my biological father and his family, I photocopied that chapter and I emailed it to my adoptive parents, to him and his wife. I brought it to my counselor and I said, read this so you know what's going on here. Yeah, I recommend that too if you're listening and you're in reunion or, just trying to figure out those puzzle pieces. Yeah, that's what a sorrowful picture, the plate getting glued back together. Well, Ellie, thank you so much for going in depth into your story. I really appreciate it. And I know that our listeners will have great value from hearing your story.
I hope so. I don't know. I feel like it should be shared if anybody can benefit or learn from it. I benefited and learned from everyone else's story during Flip the Script. So, just trying to pay it forward a little bit. Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to connect with Ellie, her Twitter handle is @Ellie11122013, and we'll have a link to her blog on our show notes. You can find those on our website, adopteeson.com, where you can send us an email or a voicemail to share your story. You can also find us on Twitter or Instagram @AdopteesOn. If you are enjoying the podcast, we would love it if you would share the show with your family. Maybe they would be able to understand you a little better if they heard some of these adoptee stories. Adoptees On would like to pass on our heartfelt condolences to Becky Drennan, who shared her story with us in episode 4. Becky's biological father recently passed away. We're sorry for your loss, Becky, and are grateful you had the chance to reunite with him. Thanks for listening. Let's talk again soon. Hey, you made it to the very end. I'd love to read you one of our latest reviews from iTunes. And this one is from the US store, from Lily C. Thank you so much for this wonderful podcast. I've enjoyed so much of the written work of so many people I'm hearing mentioned here, but now I can listen while I drive or do chores and keep learning more about how to empathize with my children. As an adoptive parent, hearing from grown adopted people, reflecting on their past and present experience of being adopted has been the most valuable resource I've found. Cannot recommend enough. Listen, listen, listen. Put your defensiveness aside, be quiet, and really process what you hear. If your child isn't speaking aloud about being adopted, you may hear something about what they might be feeling from others. Thank you, Lily C., for your kind review. You can leave us a review in iTunes, and you may get to hear it on an upcoming show.